morning, everybody. Welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor, and we're going to break down the biggest live trials and legal stories in the news today. Let's get started. It can get a bit complicated with all these different characters, but Jonna, let's just talk about what the prosecution's saying here. Something doesn't make sense, and the defense tried to hit on it. The timeline doesn't make sense. If I heard it correctly, and we're going to hear it a little bit more, it would have given David Russell Holbrook Jr. half hour, maybe under a half hour to kill her. Does something strike you as odd about that?
Something not only strikes me odd about that, but I'm also struck by the way she was killed, because this wasn't a bullet to the head, right, which would only take a second. This was a almost passionate, really vicious kind of attack. So the thing that doesn't make sense to me is why? What skin did this man have in this game?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the defense said, they had a chart, they showed it to the jury, one of the key pieces where they say is reasonable doubt is motive. And we all know that you don't need to prove motive to make your case, but it does tell a story, and if there was no motive here, and they said after 13 years they can't explain it, what does that mean? Let's continue on, though, with the prosecution's opening statement, and we can learn more about the story. Do we have the clip?
One of the most attentive voir dires I ever attended. I know that you're going to listen carefully to what these witnesses say. Now, the next thing is motive. For 13 years, Crestview Police, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, investigators from the state attorney's office were all unable to produce a motive for Russell to commit this crime. 13 years, couldn't produce one. No motive, absolutely no motive. But yet, you may or may not hear from Miss Gina Baker from the state that she might have given a statement 30 days before this trial. 30 days before the trial. She might be given a statement. Something that she just had to talk about. Opportunity. The state briefly touched about that. Briefly touched about opportunity. Imagine, if you will, trying to select your whereabouts from events that happened 13 years ago and piece together what you were doing for 1 hour on a day 13 years ago. How difficult that must be. As challenging as that is, to figure out what somebody was doing one night, 1 hour, 13 years ago, I believe that we're going to be able to do that.
Playing devil's advocate here, though, we've seen people kill in a shorter time frame. We've seen, it's possible he could have done this. And, they say now that they have key DNA evidence linking him to that crime that they didn't have before. Technology's changed. Maybe they don't have an argument, the defense.
I don't know, Jesse. This case just sort of reeks of reasonable doubt right out of the gate. And as you were talking about before we went to this clip, motive is not an element of any crime. You don't need to prove it or disprove it, but it does help the jury make sense of what went on here. Now, you have a person who really had no connection, no reason to want this person, Melissa Howard, dead. So did somebody hire him? Like, what was his motive in killing her if he is, in fact, the perpetrator? And they have to give the jury some reason here.
Well, the difference between this case and any other kind of case is the fact that he wasn't a stranger to the victim.
No.
He knew her, and he had actually, there's a report that he might have visited her shortly before her death, and there's going to be a witness who testifies, who's Melissa's friend, who says she thought it was really eerie and strange that he would visit her. And in fact, Melissa's daughter testified yesterday that she saw him show up at Melissa Howard's house. And at one point she mentioned that he showed up with a gas can. So there's some relationship here, and will the jury hang on to that?
The fact that he had some peripheral relationship, he was a friend of her ex, I get that. But we all have lots of friends. The fact that the prosecution needs to show that he walked into her house and then brutally stabbed her to death and beat her to death, as opposed to if he just wanted her dead for some reason that we don't know yet. There are far easier ways and less passionate ways to do it. So I'm very curious how the prosecution is going to lay this out.
Yeah, me too. So obviously we have a lot to talk about. We do expect a live feed in the Russell Holbrook Jr. case at 10 a.m. We're waiting to go live in the Dooley case out of Kentucky. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back.
You will also hear testimony from another DNA analyst named Sukan Worf. She works in the Jacksonville lab of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She performs a specific type of DNA testing called YSTR DNA testing. It's a newer type of DNA analysis that looks specifically at the Y chromosome. Ms. Worf will tell you that she was able to determine that the DNA on the sweatshirt matched, for that Y chromosome, Michael Holbrook or his patrilineal relative, meaning his father or his brother or his son, because she will tell you that the Y chromosome is passed from father to son, and two brothers will have the same YSTR.
Now, John, I don't like to criticize an attorney, but I will say that when he explains this DNA evidence, which we believe is what the prosecution is really holding their case on, it just didn't seem very clear. I mean, he explained how the DNA matched the brother, then explains how it can be traced to the family line, and then maybe another analyst came forward and said it matched up to a sample taken from Russell Holbrook later on. They have to be a little bit more clear about this.
Well, you know, this is the roadmap for the jury, and I guarantee you the jury was sitting there that whole time saying to themselves, who's on first? Like, and who's on trial here? Are we trying the brother? Are we trying Russell? Who are we trying? So it is confusing at this stage, and the prosecution better hope that they bring in an expert who can better explain it to the jury.
Yeah, the defense in their opening statement made the point that they have an expert who can say that this doesn't match their client. And speaking of the defense, let's continue on with the defense's opening statement, because they're saying that the prosecution just will not meet their burden. Take a look.
That was a very interesting theory the state has proposed to you. It'd be very interesting to see if they'll actually be able to back that up. There's a blank canvas before you right now, a blank canvas to paint, and the state's going to attempt to start painting that canvas. And what type of picture you see or the clarity will depend upon what they put up there. I don't believe that the state is going to present evidence during this trial that's going to paint you a very clear picture of what may or may not have occurred. We know that Melissa Howard is dead. We know she died back on January 6, 2006. But how it happened, how it occurred, I don't believe the evidence is going to show how that happened and who did it. I think that's what the evidence is going to show you. There's 13 years of information that y'all are going to have to consume. And the evidence is going to show the state has some problems, and lots of them. And through the magic of technology, there are some of them that I want to address. Identity. You're going to hear from two DNA experts. One's from FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they're going to say, I anticipate that their witness is going to say that there is some DNA that matches Russell. I believe that's what she's going to say. However, on cross-examination of that witness, let's see how she arrives at those conclusions. Were mistakes made? I think even through the state's opening, they admit that there was a contamination done by this very analyst. I think that testimony is going to be out there, that a contamination occurred during this investigation of this trial. And that mistakes were made. And it's going to come out through cross-examination. The contamination occurred on the most important piece of evidence in this trial. You're going to hear B20E. You're going to hear. And you're going to hear lots of it. Now, we are going to present Candy Zulegger. She's our expert. She has years of experience. She's a former FDLE lab analyst. Okay, she's worked at FDLE before, and until recently, she owned her own lab. She's testified and assisted in numerous cases around the country and even internationally. Candy Zulegger is going to explain that the DNA found on that was tested by the FDLE analyst could be touch DNA. And she's going to explain to you what that is. That when Russell was, as the state has already admitted, when Russell was at her house 2 days prior, that his DNA, touch DNA, could have been left there. He could have sat on the couch, and he could have left some DNA there, or any other ways could have been left there. And Melissa Howard could have sat down on the same couch, and I think the evidence is going to show that that's a possibility.
Okay, the defense is raising the points of reasonable doubt in this case. John, I want to talk about the idea of contamination. We saw a little bit yesterday when they were talking about some experts who had come to the stand, some analysts who checked out the crime scene. The idea that the investigation could itself be tainted, for lack of a better word, does the jury hold on to that in those kinds of cases and say, well, wait a second, if I see that something might have been contaminated, I have to raise my red flag, and perhaps this investigation, the fingers do not point at the defendant?
Oh, of course, and especially in a case like this where we do not have a straight line, Jesse, between the crime and the defendant. We absolutely do not. The defense in their opening is doing a great job. I love his style. You know, compare and contrast that to the prosecution, who's like, yeah, you're going to hear a 911 call. Now, listen, the quality is terrible, but it's the best we got. Like, this defense attorney is just saying, look, there's a problem with the investigation. There's an easier explanation for how this DNA got on the sweatshirt. And basically, I'm sure he's going to say there's no motive. And the jury's got to take all of this and figure out if they're going to convict somebody on such evidence. Right,
because they're saying, look, at the very least, the defendant and victim, you know, at least met at one point. He might have been at her house. It would be normal that his DNA would be at places. I mean, the connection between the characters is interesting, and I can't help but just talk to you for a second. Melissa Howard is having an affair with Chris Cadenhead. Right. Because he's married. The first time he tells his wife about the affair is when he discovers Melissa Howard's body. Just everyone process that fact. I mean, what did you make of that?
No, first of all, it's mind-boggling, number one. Second of all, I don't know if I believe that. If I were an investigator, the first person I'd be looking at is the wife of the man who was having an affair with the now dead woman.
Well, there's no evidence to suggest that.
But if I were investigating this case, I'm looking at her. She's got more of a motive than the defendant here.
Then again, we always say motive is not an element of a crime. Who knows? I mean, so let's just break the story down. The defendant was very good friends with Melissa Howard's ex-husband. Right. She had just won custody of their son.
Right. Is that enough skin in the game? You're going to go ruin your life because your friend lost custody of his son, and you're going to do it by stabbing someone to death?
Now, obviously the evidence is still coming in, but Jonna, people have killed for a lot less. People have killed for... You have questions, and they're the right questions to have. We all have questions here, and let's take a break, and when we come back, maybe we'll get some answers to those questions. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back.
All right, so you said there was a conversation about trying to jimmy the lock. Was someone successful in doing that?
We were.
All right, so what happened once the door was opened? It's okay, man. Take your time.
Once we were able to open the door, I went into the front foyer and I turned the light on.
What did you see once there was better light?
My mom lying there.
So it's not surprising how ultimately traumatic this is for her. 13 years later, recounting this, I mean, it never leaves her. She did talk about a lot of interesting things, though, about the discovery, but she also talked about the defendant and how the Wednesday before her mother wound up dead, she saw Russell Holbrook arrive at her house, and once the mother arrived as well, and they had a conversation, but she didn't know the content of the conversation. She was questioned about that under cross-examination. I guess my question, and at one point she said her mother told her, get back in the car. So she was going to get out, but she told her, get back in the car. We don't know what the communication was about. It could be speculative, but could the jury interpret it that he was a danger of some kind?
I don't know if that's enough for the jury to make that kind of inference. I mean, just the fact that she had some contact and some conversation with somebody really shouldn't be enough to allow them to have that kind of interest. But we'll see if later on, maybe through other witnesses, the prosecution develops that maybe it was a heated conversation. Maybe there was something more to it. So we'll have to wait and see there.
And the idea of like the gas can that he might have brought to her house at one point, he was really good friends with Melissa Howard's ex-husband.
Right.
It can tie in to tell a story.
It can tell a story, but Jesse, is that story going to lead us to a murder conviction? You know, so far it's all innocent. A conversation, a gas can, maybe he had borrowed it, maybe she needed gas, I don't know. Maybe she had more of a friendship with him than we know of yet. So there's still more questions than answers. Yeah.
Well, let's see what happened when Kerry Winkler was under cross-examination by the defense.
On the Wednesday prior to your mom's murder, did you see Russell Holbrook flash his lights and have your mom pull over?
No, I do not recall that.
Then I'm going to ask that you read on that report, again, 000019, your statement on read 49 through...
Nope. That is, the objection is sustained.
Does that refresh your memory?
Don't answer that. The objection is sustained. You may ask another question.
I'm going to ask you, did that same evening that you were at Tiffin Court on that night, Wednesday night, do you recall or remember Russell Holbrook being at your house?
On Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a recollection of your mother and Mr. Holbrook going into the house?
No, I do not.
Okay. Do you have, on that same evening or same day, do you have a memory of your mom and Russell talking inside the house for roughly 20 to 30 minutes?
No, I do not.
Okay. Now, also back in this time frame.
Okay, we have to jump out of that testimony from yesterday because we are live right now in the prosecution's opening statement in the case of David Dooley out of Kentucky, the man charged with killing Michelle Mockbee. This is his retrial. Let's go live. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by Law&Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. We're live at a trial right now. Let's talk about it. We are live in Kentucky in the opening statement by the prosecution in the David Dooley case, the man charged with the murder of Michelle Mockbee. The prosecutor is laying out the evidence that they have against him, and while they say they don't have a ton of DNA evidence, but some, they're saying that he had access to where she worked, where she was ultimately found dead because he had had a cleaning service and he was cleaning those offices. They also talked about how her door to her office was locked, but it seemed to be pried, possibly with a screwdriver, and Dooley, had that in his possession. And also there were some items of evidence that seemed to be missing, which would help explain how she died, and they just disappeared. So it's curious to see the evidence they have against this man or evidence they don't have against him. Let's go back live into the courtroom and we can learn more. Okay, that was the prosecution's opening statement. And David Dooley, what do you think, Jonna? What do you make of it?
You know, he's doing his job. I don't think these dots are going to be as thoroughly connected as he wants the jury to believe. But again, let's see what the defense has to say.
Similar to the David Russell Holbrook case in the sense the prosecution came out and said, let's just admit to you what the weaknesses of our cases or the weaknesses in technology, what we have and what we don't have. I like that kind of straightforward approach.
I do like that approach. It's good to get that out of the way from the beginning so the jury doesn't feel like you're trying to dupe them later on when you don't connect those dots. That's a good approach, but this is a murder case.
What's the strongest evidence they have against him from what we've heard? That he had access to the building and opportunity?
You know, yes, those are two good pieces. He did have access, he did have opportunity. They're even claiming that he had a motive because there was some finagling of the books and was he getting overpaid, that kind of thing. But is that enough motive to commit murder?
Charles Merritt, you know, we talked about that case. I think the defense has begun their opening statements in that case. Do we have that in the... Okay, let's go live there. Let's get in some analysis if we can. Jonna, the defense really laying into the prosecution's case and talking about everything, a lack of evidence and bias. What do you make of it?
Yeah, she's laying out the case for reasonable doubt. And she's actually doing a pretty good job. She's not very animated, you know, she's pretty monotone, but factually, she's laying out reasonable doubt pretty clearly.
This is her second chance to try to get, you know, an acquittal here because the first time he was convicted and now he was granted a retrial. We'll talk more about that later on. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Wow, I have so much to talk about. I want to just talk about the last thing she said. She's targeting the husband now. What did you tell me as we were watching that?
So, well, this just took a turn, and I said as we were watching, I said, she better have some evidence to back that up. You know, you better put your money where your mouth is.
This is a fascinating question. How much can you raise reasonable doubt by this theory? She says he's the only one that knew where she was. Maybe he was there, no alibi, he was sleeping. As a defense attorney, can you just throw out any theory like that?
You cannot throw out any theory like that without having some evidence to substantiate it. Because, look, jury's now going to be hanging on that. Okay, where's the evidence? They want to hear the evidence that some other dude did it and that some other dude was her husband. As this trial goes on, she better bring it. Or she may as well put her foot in her mouth right now.
She had also made the comment that I believe she said it was an investigator who told the employees of the company where Michelle Mockbee worked, you better get your story straight.
Right.
Because we don't want any holes. We don't want a defense attorney poking holes in this. If she can show that, that's a huge point.
That is a huge point. That is a defense attorney's job. A defense attorney's job is to look for gaps in the evidence that may exonerate his or her client. And for a cop to not want to get to the truth, but instead want to button up their investigation, that's not going to sit well with any jury.
Is she making some good points right now?
She's making some actually excellent points right now.
Now, I believe she's been on longer than the prosecution. And does that play for a jury?
You know, usually the judge will put a little time limit, some sort of time limit on your opening and your closing. I don't know if he's done that here, but she's just laying it out methodically. She's probably getting close to the end now with this third-party defense that she's trying to lay out. The
jury in the first trial convicted him after 16 hours. Does that tell you it wasn't an easy decision for them?
Yeah, definitely not an easy decision. I'm almost, just listening to what we've heard so far, I'm a little bit surprised that the previous jury got there.
Well, there's more evidence here, and I guess the idea about that surveillance footage about a man trying to enter the offices the night before will be a huge factor for the defense.
And that plays right into what she just said. She indicated, did the husband have somebody else do this for him? Could have been that guy.
There's a lot to talk about here. Yeah. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, either she's going to still be, delivering the opening statement, or we might get the first witness. And again, if you want to watch the David Russell Holbrook Jr. case out of Florida, go to lawandcrime.com. We'll be right back. So I think it's fair to say this defense attorney really laid down the gauntlet, particularly against the husband. What did you make of that last part of her opening statement?
I think the jury's going to be on the edge of their seats with this. She is squarely pointing the finger at the husband. You know, normally, Jesse, when we have some other dude, a third-party defense, could have been this guy, could have been somebody else. She's like, boom, he had motive and opportunity, and oh, look what we found when we examined his hard drive.
Is she going to try to prove that when the case is handed over to the defense? Now, let's talk about the husband. Let's show the records. Let's show how much money he was getting into. So she would be almost trying to try another case within this trial.
It's almost as if she's presenting an affirmative defense, because it's not enough to just sort of lay it out there and let the jury sort of float around. You have to have some solid evidence to substantiate a third-party defense claim. And if she's telling the truth in her opening statement, she's got it.
But here's the thing, and it's really bizarre, you know, the way she laid this out, and I wasn't expecting
No.
this. The prosecution mentioned the husband, but in passing, they said police interviewed him, he was distraught, take our word for it.
Yeah, remember, and he actually said he acted, and the word the prosecution used, I remember because it struck me, he acted appropriately. And immediately I said, you know, define appropriately when a spouse is suddenly murdered. Interesting fact, bring that back to the defense, I didn't realize he was going to get paid more, the husband would get paid more if she died at work.
At work, and she's talking about that he was in financial distress. We keep hearing this often in a lot of our cases. We heard the same thing in the Charles Merritt case. Now, again, the first trial was, the jury deliberated, I think I said 16 hours. We may see the same kind of thing, but it's not a clear-cut case from what we just heard from the prosecution and the defense.
No, it's not. And you have to remember, one of the reasons why we have a retrial is because the prosecution in the first case left out some evidence, that what we call Brady material, that might be exculpatory, in that they failed to show that there was a video showing somebody else entered the building at about the time when this murder took place. That's huge. So this retrial is certainly appropriate.
And the retrial has been a little complicated. We know that the Commonwealth attorney who was trying the first case, her name's Linda Talley Smith. She engaged in an affair with the lead investigator, Bruce McVeigh. Now, they claim that they had this affair, or this, I don't even know if it's an affair. It's just a sexual relationship after the trial. But why does that matter? Why do we care about this?
So really the implication there is that if the prosecution and the lead investigator are literally in bed together, that the investigation might not have been completely above board. Like, he's going to be trying to help his lover, and so maybe some of the evidence that was collected wasn't collected the way they presented it to a jury. I think that's an important piece.
It won't come into evidence here. We don't think we're going to hear that, but you and I know it. The audience knows this. And what we are hearing the flavor of is there seems to be some sort of bias, and perhaps things were not done according to protocol in this investigation. I mean, are you getting that sense from the defense's opening statement?
I am getting that sense, but I am also, I think we're clearly getting the sense that any sort of bungling of the investigation is going to be secondary to the defense attempting to prove that some other person did it and that some other person was the victim's husband.
But talking about some of the prosecution's stronger points here, I mean, the idea is David Dooley did have access to that building. He got in an hour before she did. He had these cleaning supplies. He had these tools. He maybe had the items to kill her and dispose of them, and he left the scene.
All right, but hang on, Jesse. One of the other things, bringing it back to the defense, that she pointed out is a crime like this would leave clues. This was a messy, horrible, disgusting crime. Like, she's bludgeoned with a blunt instrument, horrible bag over the head, blood all over the place.
Dragged to another part.
You have to be one heck of a good criminal to scrub all that off of your truck, off of yourself, off of everything that the investigators, they didn't find any evidence in his truck. So if he killed her, fled the scene, what did he flee the scene in? Or, because they didn't find any blood evidence where it should have been. That's big to me.
So why are they going after Dooley? I mean, they're one of the areas that they said is there were other people who had access to this building in the warehouse. Why did they go directly towards Dooley?
I'm not sure whether he was sort of an easy mark or if, in an investigation, when you set your sights on one person and you just ignore the evidence of other potential suspects and defendants, they were so narrowly focused, that's probably what they did.
Now, we know something that the jury will not hear, that the fact that David Dooley, the defendant, has also been charged in a child pornography case. That is going to be tried after the conclusion of this trial. What do you make of that fact?
I don't think it has anything to do with this particular case, and it's good that the jury doesn't know that because you don't want to mix up the two. And
but you and I are talking. What do you make of that?
Well, anybody who's caught up in a child pornography ring, if it's true, is a horrible person in my book. But what is the evidence of that? That's what I'd like to know.
And it's, if he was convicted of this years ago, maybe brought up in this trial, it's two separate kinds of crimes here.
Very separate. And maybe the prosecution pointed the finger and said, we have this on you, so why don't you make a deal with us? And he said, not going to happen.
Jonna, Thanks so
Yes.
much for coming on to
Oh, I
talk
have
about
to
these
go.
cases.
This
the time
is
up.
exciting. I know, and I hate that, but I'll see you very soon.
Yeah, come back. We have a lot to talk about. So we are going to take a break again. There's a break right now in the Dooley case. They'll be back after this short recess. I think there's also a break in the David Russell Holbrook case out of Florida. We got a lot to talk about, a lot to cover. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.